Hang in there. The reception will immediately follow in the exhibition hall. So again, thank you for coming. And I'll start with introductions of myself and our panelists. And you'll find some of this information in your program, but some of that information has changed as well. In order to give you the best panel possible, we've got a couple of new people who are not listed in the program. So we'll introduce each of us here. My name is Bruce Longbottom. I'm a trademark attorney for Eli Lilly and Company. We are a pharmaceutical company based in Indianapolis, Indiana, United States, of course. We're a worldwide company, and in France we have 2,641 employees, so a substantial employer in France, and I point out that those are jobs that we do protect as part of our anti-counterfeiting program. I provide legal support for our anti-counterfeiting operations, and I also currently serve as chair of INTA's Anti-Counterfeiting Committee. So it's my privilege to moderate this very distinguished panel. Okay, our panel features a good balance, I would say. When it comes to the Internet, there are different views on this problem, and I think we have good perspectives on the problem here, different views. We do have two representatives of rights owners, one of whom is still on her way, but she does promise to get here soon. Two representatives of Internet intermediaries here, and we have two representatives of law enforcement here as well, all of whom play a role in the battle against counterfeiters and pirates on the Internet, and so we'll get each of their different perspectives. Okay, first we've got Ted Shapiro. Ted is the Senior Vice President. He is based in Brussels, nearby. Ted is responsible for MPA's legal department, overseeing legal services on matters including copyright litigation and copyright compliance. Ted represents MPA on content protection matters in Europe and is very familiar, maybe even painfully familiar, with the problems faced by copyright owners in the virtual world. So we're glad to have Ted here. We've got one more rights owner. Again, she's on her way. We'll introduce her when she gets here. Okay, representing Internet intermediaries, we first have Annabelle Daniel Varda. She is Senior Trademark Counsel with Google, Inc., company based in California, but I believe you're based in New York City. Okay. Formerly, Annabelle was corporate counsel for Apple, Inc., and there she worked on iTunes, trademark and marketing matters, and previously she clerked as a federal judge in California. So I think you get the award, Annabelle, for most popular trademarks in your resume, Google, Apple, and iTunes, especially among the younger crowd, I would say. We also have Benoit Tabaka. He is Director of Legal and Public Affairs for Price Minster. If you can give a wave there, Benoit, great. Price Minster is part of the Rakuten Group, and it was the first e-commerce website in France and is one of the main online marketplaces in Europe. Prior to Price Minster, Benoit served as the head of the e-commerce department of the Forum des droits sur l'Internet. Not bad, okay. Hopefully we can hear more about that. It's a multi-stakeholder body supported by the French government. Also new initiatives that he's involved with. So we thank you for Annabelle and Benoit being here. And last but not least, of course, we have the two representatives of law enforcement with us. We were to have Corinne Cleostrat, but instead she could not be here, so we're very glad to have Luc Stroman here. Luc does work with Corinne, and in particular is responsible for the Internet monitoring unit of French Customs, Cyber Customs, or Cyber Douane, perhaps? Douane? And he's a specialist in fighting Internet fraud, so glad to have him. And from the United States we have Eric Barnett. He is the Assistant Deputy Director at the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, also known as ICE, and is Senior Policy Advisor on Intellectual Property Enforcement. And earlier today we heard John Morton, the Director of ICE, speak to us, so we're familiar with ICE, and Eric is with that excellent agency. And in particular, Eric has been active in ICE's initiative to fight counterfeits and pirated content sold online, hence his presence on the panel. And before joining ICE, Eric was a federal and state prosecutor and is also currently an adjunct professor at Georgetown Law School. And timing is everything, so our last panelist, we will introduce her now. This is Nathalie Mollet-Bertois? Bertois. Thank you, Mollet-Bertois. Executive Vice President, Public and Legal Affairs for Lacoste, with responsibility over legal matters related to worldwide licenses and selective distribution, as well as brand protection. And prior to Lacoste, Natalie, you might be familiar with her in this role, was the Global Intellectual Property Director for Louis Vuitton, also known as LVMH, for many years, and is a well-known speaker on this topic, having spoken on this panel at an earlier Global Congress in Dubai back in 2008. So really excellent panel for us today, and I must say, standing here with this panel, I feel somewhat like Einstein's driver. And maybe you've heard the story. It's late in the day, so we can tell stories, right? Well, maybe you've heard the story of Einstein's driver. Albert Einstein in the and this is before he was well known, and it's a new theory, before TV and really mass media, no internet back then. And so to publicize his theory, he went on a driving tour of Europe. Went to 19 different universities throughout Europe, and each time he would introduce himself so people knew him and would give his lecture on the theory of relativity. And so there he went driving from university to university with the same driver from spot to spot. Well, Einstein kind of had a silly sense of humor. You might have seen his picture where he's sticking out his tongue. I think that's on posters nowadays. So kind of had a silly sense of humor. And so as they're driving to that 19th university to give that same lecture again, and each time he would give the lecture, the driver would attend, sitting in the back of the auditorium and listen to him give the lecture. He said to his driver, "Why don't we just switch places? No one knows what I look like, and you've heard me give my lecture 18 times, so why don't we switch places? I'll wear your hat and your jacket, and I'll sit in the back, and you stand up front and give the lecture." And the driver's like, "Okay, could work." So they pulled the car over, switched clothing. The Einstein's driver went to the front of the auditorium. Einstein sat in the back with the hat and jacket on. And sure enough, it went flawlessly. The driver gave the theory of relativity perfectly. He finished, they all applauded, stood up, went smoothly. But then someone raised their hand and asked a question about the theory of relativity. At first, the driver is just, "What do I do here? I'm just the driver." But he quickly collected himself and said, "I can't believe you asked that question. That question is so simple, even my driver could answer it." So I feel like Einstein's driver. If there are any tough questions, I'm going to turn to the panel and ask them to answer those for us here today. But more seriously, internet counterfeiting and piracy, obviously a very serious problem. Why is it such a serious problem? And we've heard it many times in the Congress so far. You can't miss it here at this Congress. Well, sales of counterfeits and pirated content can be found on the internet. And when we talk about the internet, it's a big category, big word there. You've got websites that are both business to consumer and business to business. You've got auction and marketplace sites, such as Benoit will talk about. You can find advertisements for counterfeits and pirated content in places such as social media sites or search results, sponsored and organic, spam a lot of times, and then also even classified sites such as Craigslist. And we're not even sure what the next generation of technology will be with regard to the internet, so it may yet change once again. And why is it so difficult to solve? Well, when you're on the internet, you can be worldwide and you can be anonymous. So it's relatively easy to set up an online business compared to a brick-and-mortar business. It's easy to look very professional and genuine online when in fact you're not. And there's no central regulation. There's no one you say, "I'd like to get a permit to do business on the internet. Please give me my permit." You can just do it. And once you're caught, it's relatively easy to switch servers, switch domain names, switch your method of doing business, and then pop up back again. So all those factor into the difficulty of the problem and why it's so difficult to solve. Now, efforts to solve this problem fall into generally 4 categories. There's civil litigation to enforce existing laws. We're not going to go into that too much on this panel. I think really the Global Congress isn't the place to get into the nuts and bolts of civil litigation. There have been policy and legislative efforts to address the problem. We will talk about that. There have been voluntary efforts by internet-based companies. We'll talk about that here as well. And there have been criminal enforcement actions against online pirates and counterfeiters as well. So we will look at all various aspects of that. And just to highlight the problem in a little bit more specificity perhaps, Within the past month, this was on January 11th, the firm Mark Monitor released a report, and they looked at 22 major brands on the internet, and they found that the statistics were just amazing. The 10 media brands they looked at, they found 43 unique websites which they would classify as digital piracy, and those sites generated 148 million visits per day. They've also found, 26 sites that were selling counterfeit prescription drugs. Those had more than 141,000 visits per day. And then they also found 21 e-commerce sites selling counterfeit luxury goods, and those had more than 96,000 visits per day. And in their own words, they said that is the tip of the iceberg. So a very serious problem here, and that's what we're here to discuss and hopefully come to some thoughts as to how to cooperate to better address this. And each of our panelists will now give just a few minutes to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into a dialogue, and we will save about 15 or so minutes at the end for questions and answers. So, thank you. Natalie?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you very much, Bruce, for the introduction. I think we need to thank very much also the organizers of this Congress, which is extremely well attended, and it shows how important the problem is and how concerned we are all. I'm very pleased of that because a few years ago you reminded that we were in Dubai and we were trying to argue for cooperation, and since that we have had very nice examples of cooperation between all actors, and we'll mention that after. A few words to introduce me. As Bruce said, I've been 23 years with Louis Vuitton. During the last 7 years I was IP Director Global, and dealing with all the brands of the fashion group division, including Louis Vuitton, but not only, with a team of 40 persons, big team. So now I just joined Lacoste, and I'm extremely pleased to speak about this topic of online counterfeiting for two reasons. First, because counterfeiting has always been a key priority for Lacoste since the very beginning. You probably know that René Lacoste, the famous tennis champion, was the one who decided in 1933 to put a crocodile on a polo shirt, envisioning at that time the power of a brand. So you can imagine that how important it is to protect this brand today. It's also important because Lacoste is willing to be a major player on internet. Lacoste products are available already on Lacoste official websites, mainly in Europe and the US, and we are also very proud to have a lot of fans on Facebook, for example, on our Lacoste page. We are ranked 33 among all brands worldwide, and ranked 4th when you consider the fashion sector. So we are very proud of our 4.5 million fans on Facebook. In terms of anti-counterfeiting organization, we have dedicated team based in Paris, Geneva, and New York, and we are like all other right owners, monitoring on a very regular basis all auction platforms, and not only those platforms. So we are extremely involved, and I will share with you some further details after that.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to also thank the organizers for inviting us. I don't know about Einstein's drivers, perhaps Einstein's lawyers, but a few words about how internet piracy is affecting the copyright sector. Some of you may have heard about a recent Envisional report, and I think the Envisional guys are here. I saw their stand upstairs, that finds that 23.8% of global internet traffic is infringing, with about with the BitTorrent network accounting for about half of that. So while copyright infringement on peer-to-peer networks remains a serious concern, there's also a massive problem now with streaming sites, leeching sites, direct download sites, and what I like to call cyber stashes. However, it's important to bear in mind that this is not a problem that is purely copyright or an intellectual property, for that matter, a problem. It's a problem related to the enforcement of the rule of law online. Can we create an environment where all stakeholders feel safe, not just IP owners, but consumers, participants in social networks, kids, people that would like to launch businesses, etc. Some of the recent events linked to WikiLeaks and the acts of avenging hackers, the anonymous group, and all of the other illegality that's going on the internet, phishing, fraud, things that we face all the time, really underline this. Now, with respect to the film industry that I work for, we focus our enforcement efforts online on operations that are making huge amounts of money, mostly from advertising, but also in some cases direct revenue that they either ask people to pay and then give them nothing, or that they merely steal their credit card details. And these operators are making a lot of money. Now you might say to yourself, why not just license these guys? If they've got a workable model, maybe you should license them. Problem is that most of these sites have no desire to be licensed. Why bother paying for the content? And indeed, many of these operators espouse many important values about freedom of speech, privacy, and yet they do not respect the fundamental rights of others. And I'm not only talking about property rights. They don't really give a toss about anybody else's privacy either. So what can be done? Now, we focus, of course, the member companies of the MPA in launching legal alternatives. The best way, of course, to fight copyright piracy online is to provide a legal alternative to the illegal offer. Of course, it's very difficult, and you've heard it said before, when you're competing with free. Criminal actions can be very important, and we'll hear a bit about that from the colleagues on the panel, in particular from ICE. You should know that the gentleman from ICE, you have a lot of fans in the audience. Civil litigation against sites and intermediaries, education and awareness, and of course working on legislative and technological solutions. Now, with respect to civil litigation or civil enforcement online, it can be very complex. The issues in particular with respect to secondary liability come into play. We have seen generally from the case law in Europe that illegal sites are not benefiting from the so-called safe harbors or privileges in the e-commerce directive, very similar to those in the DMCA in the States. However, the e-commerce directive does provide a tailor-made defense to these pirates, and you hear them all the time saying, oh, we're just a search engine. It's used by intermediaries to resist cooperation. They say, in fact, if we cooperate, maybe we'll lose our privilege. There are unclear borders on the notion of to what extent there needs to be monitoring and what the scope of injunctions can be. So there is a need to clarify that. There are complex privacy issues. Just a few more points to conclude. For those of you that are considering civil litigation, there are a number of factors that we've discerned when building a case, particularly when you're looking at sites that are structurally infringing copyright, ones where it is a waste of time to merely send takedown notices. It's really a fool's errand. Is the site actively looking for and enabling access to infringing content? Has it intervened to make the content available to a new audience? Does it have knowledge? And there, of course, with the e-commerce directive, that can sometimes be difficult. What's user perception of the site? Do users think it's making it available? Is there evidence of inducing people to infringe copyright? Are they making money? What's the level of non-infringing copyright on the site? And do they cooperate? And finally, it's interesting to note some things that are going on at the European level. The European AP Observatory that has been mentioned before is doing some really great work. There are a couple of important commission dialogues. And of course, there's an ongoing review of the Enforcement Directive and E-commerce Directive. For those of you that haven't looked at the review of the Enforcement Directive, there's some very helpful already clarifications in that document. So with that, I'll pass it on.
Actually, I'm not quite sure how to access my slides. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Bruce, and the organizers of the Global Congress. We're very pleased to be here. I'd like to take the... All set? I'd like to take the few minutes that I have to highlight some of the measures that Google has been taking to combat counterfeit within its principal advertising platform, AdWords. Specifically, I want to discuss the AdWords counterfeit policy that we have and the associated AdWords complaint process, AdWords counterfeit complaint process, that is. As an initial point, I would like to clarify the difference between our AdWords trademark policy and the AdWords counterfeit policy. These are two very different policies, but a lot of times they're conflated, and I think it creates a lot of confusion about Google's stance with respect to counterfeit and AdWords. First, with respect to our trademark policy, while there are some geographical nuances to the policy, in most countries it's generally permissible for ads to serve off of keywords that may be trademarks. We feel this policy is actually beneficial to users. It helps get more relevant info to the user in the process of their search, and its built-in restrictions strike a balance with the trademark owner's rights. To illustrate some of the benefits, I'll just provide an example using one of our own brands. Nexus S is our mobile device. Not as popular as we would like, but nevertheless, if I type in Nexus S as the keyword, and keyword is just a fancy word for the words that you put in a search box on a search engine, I may see ads from a reseller of the device, I may see ads from a retailer who sells accessories for the device, and I might even see ads for a competing device. All of this information we feel is beneficial to the user because it really does inform their search. Now, this is in direct contrast with counterfeit. We don't see any benefit to counterfeit ads. As a result, our counterfeit policy isn't focused on trademarks. The focus of it is really, is that ad promoting a counterfeit site? And if it is, and we get a complaint, then that ad goes down. This is just an example to illustrate this last point. If you look at the example, the keyword is handbag, and it triggers the ad, designer handbags, good prices, high quality bags and accessories, and whatever the URL may be. And if, as you see, there are no trademarks implicated by either the keyword or the ad text. On the face of this looks perfectly benign. But if we get a counterfeit complaint and we find that it's promoting a counterfeit site, then that ad goes down and other measures are taken as well. So this is really just illustrating this isn't about trademarks, it's about counterfeit, and it's not acceptable. Google has zero tolerance for counterfeit. It harms our users, it harms our advertisers, and it harms Google. To the extent that there's any misconception that Google may benefit from advertisers who are counterfeiters, this is simply false. Obviously, to the extent our users and our advertisers are harmed, we're harmed. But more practically, counterfeiters are not exactly your ideal customers. They provide false information, they provide stolen credit cards, not exactly people who you're going to get payment from. In addition, we're required to devote a lot of resources to combating counterfeit, both in terms of personnel, in terms of developing tools to combat counterfeit. So it really is a drain in a lot of different ways. This is our actual complaint form. And an important thing to note about this complaint process in this form is that you don't have to be a rights holder to submit a complaint. Anyone can submit a complaint. So if you see a counterfeit site and has nothing to do with your brand and it appears in AdWords, then submit a complaint and we will follow up on it. The next two slides I'm going to skip. We've been encouraged to keep our introductory comments brief, so I'll touch upon some of these points in the dialogue. This last slide, it contains all the, I'm sorry, this is actually the right slide. This last slide contains all the relevant links and contact information for both our trademark policy and our counterfeit policy, and it also includes the link to our counterfeit complaint form. I'm not sure if this presentation will be distributed after the Congress, hopefully so the attendees have access to this information. Just in closing, we've received a lot of positive feedback from major brand owners in connection with how effective this program is. Obviously, counterfeiters are a tricky bunch, so these efforts are ongoing, and it's definitely an area where we want to collaborate with brand owners. There really is a shared interest here, and part of that is just brand owners submitting complaints. The more complaints that we have on file, the more information that we have that helps us combat counterfeit. And any other ideas, of course, are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. As a good representative of the internet industry, I have also a presentation. So, thank you very much, Bruce, for your introduction. My name is Benoît Tabaka. I'm in charge of the legal and governmental affairs for Prime Minister. Prime Minister is not an infringement of the Prime Minister name. I'm not sure. And Prime Minister is a French company. It has been created 10 years ago, and it's a marketplace business model. And Prime Minister has been bought now 6 months ago by Rakuten. Rakuten is the main e-commerce website in Japan. They have around between 13 and 40 market share in e-commerce market in Japan, so it's a very huge company. And they have just launched in October a joint venture with Baidu in China. And one of my jobs now in Prime Minister is not only to be in charge of legal affairs in France and Europe, it's also in charge of all anti-counterfeiting policy for Rakuten. So, as this session is focused on partnership and sharing, I decided to share with you my French accent, welcome in Paris, and to explain something. So, first, Rakuten, one of the largest internet services company in Japan. As you can see, Rakuten have many websites in Japan, Taiwan, China. Rakuten has bought Prime Minister in June and bought Buy.com in May. Buy.com in charge of the expansion of Rakuten in US, and Prime Minister is in charge of the expansion of Rakuten in Europe. And currently Prime Minister targets the French, the Spanish and the English markets, but we will open the German website at the end of this year, and we should open a new website in Europe and mainly in the East Europe at the beginning of the next year. As you know, counterfeiting and marketplace, internet marketplace is very big topic, a very hot topic with many litigations, and it's clear that the classical speech that you could heard in many conferences is that yes, counterfeiting is very big problem, and we have not the products between our hands. I'm sorry, and we are not the seller. We are not the seller of the products. So we could treat the notification, we could apply the notice and take down principle and be sure that if you notice any content, we will delete it. Yes, it's a classical speech from the internet companies, but it's not our. Since from now 5 years, Price Minister has developed a new approach. It's based on the our own responsibility. I think that our own responsibility is to detect before the publication any illegal or harmful content or behavior. That is to say that we have decided to have a proactive and preventive measures to detect, to analyze our website and to detect some illegal content, for example counterfeiting, but also all kind of illegal content that a seller could propose. How it works? It's very simple. First step, we will analyze the profile of the seller. For example, a private seller with 10 mobile phones, with 15 perfumes, for us is suspicious. So we will ask to the private seller how he could have this kind of product. Or a private seller could have 10 iPhone, 10 iPad. It's not normal for us. So we will ask some information. And we will apply the precaution principle. That is to say that if the account of the seller is detected, its account will be suspended, and if he don't give any information about the product and to prove that the product is genuine, its account will not be reopened. Second step is the content. That is to say that between all non-suspicious profiles, we will analyze the content of the offer. For example, to detect if someone wants to propose a product which something abnormal. For example, someone who wants to offer and Nokia mobile phone with no GPS. The last Nokia mobile phone have a GPS. So for us, no GPS in the content of the offer is a suspicious keyword. And third, if we have no detection, content and offers will be published. To improve our anti-counterfeiting policy, Price Minister has developed several partnerships. The main partnership is with right owners. We have concluded some agreements, informal agreements with right owners to have some training of our team to detect counterfeiting products on our website. These trainings could be training about the pictures of the product, to detect on a picture a fake product, to detect some suspicious profile, etc. Second kind of partnership is with French Customs, and mainly with the team of Luc, and we have some sharing knowledge about sellers, about new networks, about new products, and to improve our mutual knowledge between Price Minister and French Customs. We have also signed a charter with the right owners under the supervision of the French Economy Minister in December. It was the first time in Europe that internet company and right owners signed something about the fight against counterfeiting. I think it was a very good first step in the fight against counterfeiting. We have signed in March a charter with French Customs to formalize our partnership with Customs. And we prepare the European MOU, and I could announce that we have reached a final draft of the MOU in January, at the beginning of January this year, and this MOU should be signed in April, I think, I hope, in Brussels. So we have many kind of partnership and many kind of formalization of their partnership. And regarding Rakuten, for your information, Prime Minister policy is a part now of the Rakuten policy. The word in the Rakuten is globalization of the fight against counterfeiting. And Rakuten has signed on September a MOU with Louis Vuitton, with the help of Nathalie, about the fight against counterfeiting. This MOU has been signed in the Louis Vuitton shop in Champs-Élysées with Hiroshi Mikitani, is the CEO of Rakuten. And also, for your information, Rakuten has launched in October a new marketplace in China, joint venture with Baidu. And I quote the press release. Very interesting because in this press release, distributed to English, Japanese, Chinese press and medias, it's clear that the Rakuten Group has decided to use the Price Minister tools and the Price Minister approach for all the marketplace of Rakuten. So our preventive and proactive approach will become the principle for all Rakuten websites in the world, and it's a new way of partnership for the fight against counterfeiting. Thank you.
Eh bien, bonjour. Je m'appelle Luc Stroman et je suis responsable de la cellule de lutte contre la fraude de la douane française. Je remplace ma directrice Corinne Cléostrate qui malheureusement ne pouvait pas être présente ce jour. Ma mission principale est de lutter contre la fraude sur Internet, donc je pense avoir quelques compétences en la matière. Alors pourquoi la création d'un service spécialisé au sein de la douane française? La réponse de la douane historique est de s'occuper de la marchandise au moment du dédouanement. Donc, dans le cas d'Internet, la première réponse de la douane consiste à stopper la diffusion de contrefaçons au sein des unités douanières de dédouanement dans les centres de colis postaux de fret express. On constate depuis des années l'augmentation exponentielle du commerce sur Internet. Donc l'année dernière, les chiffres ont dû encore augmenter de 25%. Donc les saisies douanières en parallèle augmentent aussi considérablement. Mais cette réponse par rapport à la saisie directe de la marchandise n'était plus suffisante compte tenu de la menace. Parce que la vision douanière à ce niveau de la fraude est celle de l'arrivée simplement du... Vous ne pouvez pas travailler au niveau en amont, en fait, directement au niveau de la constitution de la fraude elle-même. Donc a été créé en 2009 par la volonté du ministre français du budget, un service cyberdouane doté donc à la fois d'analystes du renseignement et d'enquêteurs spécialisés. Alors qu'est-ce qu'un enquêteur, qu'est-ce qu'un analyste du renseignement dans un sens douanier? Eh bien, il s'agit d'officiers de douane avec des compétences informatiques. Donc une nouvelle espèce de douanier à la fois à l'aise avec le réseau Internet. Derrière ce nom global d'Internet, on va trouver un grand nombre de prestataires techniques, d'intermédiaires, des registrars pour acheter des noms de domaine, des hébergeurs de sites, des fournisseurs d'accès, des opérateurs de e-commerce et des intermédiaires financiers. Donc 8 personnes, analystes du renseignement, mais aussi avec la volonté de créer au sein de la douane vraiment un pôle de compétences qui sera diffusé à l'ensemble des services douaniers. Le but étant qu'au final, dans chaque région française, un relais de cyberdouane soit capable en local de à la fois localiser de la fraude sur Internet, identifier ses auteurs, et ensuite identifier, de transmettre ce dossier à un service opérationnel des douanes. Donc ils sont de plusieurs types en douane. Donc au sein de mon service, donc la Direction nationale du renseignement et des enquêtes douanières, existe des enquêteurs spécialisés dans les flux financiers. Donc je reparlerai juste après, je vous montrerai un cas concret d'enquête sur Internet. Existe un service de douane opérationnelle qu'on peut activer dans le cas où on est capable de prouver qu'il existe des stocks de marchandises. Je ne vous cacherai pas qu'en douane, on est très très fortement attaché à la marchandise. Internet nous posait un problème à cause de la parcellisation des envois. En sachant que un ours qu'on offre à Noël qui est déficient d'un point de vue de la sécurité, que vous saisissiez un conteneur plein d'ours ou que 1000 paquets arrivent avec le même ours, c'est le même produit au final, la dangerosité est la même. Ensuite, on peut s'appuyer sur un réseau de brigades douanières et enfin, on a aussi des officiers de douane judiciaire. Donc tout dépend en fait du type de fraude. Alors moi, je verrai deux types de fraude. Une fraude que je qualifierais de franco-française, c'est-à-dire des gens qui revendent sur des sites de e-commerce basés en France ou des sites de commerce internationaux mais avec des représentants légaux en France. Donc notre code des douanes, nos pouvoirs douaniers nous permettent d'identifier, je dirais, pour simplifier, n'importe quoi sur Internet, lié bien sûr à une enquête en cours. Encore faut-il savoir à qui demander et quelle information demander. Donc d'où le besoin vraiment d'une coopération renforcée avec le secteur privé. Notre vision des choses est que nous sommes, il y a une table, d'un côté de la table il y a les bons et de l'autre côté de la table il y a les méchants. Voilà, donc pour nous, tous les opérateurs d'Internet, les opérateurs du e-commerce sont nos partenaires. Personne ne veut d'un Internet non régulé sur laquelle on va acheter de la marchandise contrefaite. Donc je me félicite de la présence de Benoît Tabaka, par exemple, qui est un bon exemple de coopération entre l'administration et le secteur privé, puisque Benoît Tabaka, on travaille ensemble, je dirais, depuis des années, de manière opérationnelle tout à fait efficace, et cette méthode de travail a été officialisée, je dirais, dans le cadre d'un protocole signé par le directeur général des douanes l'année dernière. Donc cette petite fraude, on va identifier les auteurs sur Internet, on va créer un dossier, on va essayer d'établir le chiffre d'affaires des personnes, on va établir ce qu'ils ont vendu sur Internet, par exemple depuis 2 ans, et on va trouver le service adéquat des douanes françaises qui ira porter l'action véritablement répressive, puisque Cyberdouane, je le répète, est un service de renseignement. Nous n'arrêtons pas nous-mêmes les personnes. Alors je vais vous présenter maintenant un cas concret de fraude sur Internet, donc ce que j'appellerais la fraude globale, c'est-à-dire la fraude internationale avec constitution de sites basés à l'étranger, mais Cyberdouane appartient à la douane française. Moi, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est d'arrêter des infracteurs français. Donc on a reçu une information sur un site intéressant, qui vendait des biens contrefaits, à la fois du textile et aussi des chaussures. Donc on a lancé nos procédures d'enquête, c'est-à-dire tout type d'identification, qui a déposé le nom de domaine, où sont basés les serveurs, mais aussi des choses qui sont beaucoup plus compliquées, enfin pas compliquées, mais par exemple, y a-t-il de la publicité faite pour ce site? Y a-t-il un contrat, par exemple, puisque la société Google est présente, y a-t-il un contrat de type AdWords concernant ce site? Voilà. Donc pour nous, un dossier, une affaire, c'est un peu une pelote de laine. On va tirer sur plusieurs fils et on va voir celui en fait qui est le plus porteur. Au final, quand l'enquête est terminée à notre niveau, Alors, les particularités de cette fraude, je vous les répète, les stocks sont souvent à l'étranger, c'est-à-dire que la marchandise est fabriquée sur place en Asie du Sud-Est et les acheteurs se connectent sur le site internet, passent leur commande et ensuite payent souvent par carte de crédit ou un moyen de paiement international. Donc les sites, je l'ai dit, sont hébergés à l'étranger, donc on ne peut pas agir directement sur eux. Et les commandes sont envoyées par colis postal directement au destinateur, au consommateur final. Conséquence aussi, les organisateurs de ce type de fraude sont persuadés, enfin ont l'impression qu'ils ne risquent pas directement grand-chose. Donc ça veut dire que les paquets qui vont arriver de manière massive dans les centres de dédouanement postaux ne sont pas dédouanés, ils sont déclarés en valeur minimale, cadeau. Mais aussi, ce commerce génère un chiffre d'affaires très important et aucun droit douanier, taxe ou impôt sur le revenu ou tout type de taxe étatique ne sera payé sur ce type de fraude. Alors au final, voilà l'exemple de schéma qu'on a pu simplifier concernant ce type de fraude. Alors on peut constater que la fraude, elle se professionnalise. C'est-à-dire qu'il ne s'agit pas d'une simple personne qui va déposer un nom de domaine, trouver une usine pour fabriquer la marchandise et la faire livrer. Il y a un organisateur de la fraude, il y a aussi des personnes qui ont des tâches définies, par exemple valoriser le contenu du site sur les moteurs de recherche, par exemple, des personnes aussi qui vont s'occuper de toute la partie paiement. Alors, sur le responsable final, enfin de l'organisateur de la fraude. Alors, on a pour cela, la nouveauté, en fait, pour nous, c'était qu'on a quitté un peu notre vision de taxation, enfin, de saisie directe de la marchandise contrefaite, qu'on n'oublie pas évidemment, mais on a travaillé sur la génération, les flux financiers qui sont générés par ce type de fraude. Cela veut dire que concrètement, on a remonté sur les moyens de paiement, puis les comptes bancaires des infracteurs, on a reconstitué le chiffre d'affaires et au final, on a appliqué à ce chiffre d'affaires la législation douanière. Alors, sur ce cas précis, donc on est arrivé à un chiffre de près de 5 millions d'euros. Alors, on a d'autres cas où le chiffre d'affaires peut même dépasser les 10 millions d'euros. Ce qui est intéressant aussi dans ce cas précis, c'est que le dossier ensuite a été porté par la douane administrative, ce qu'on appelle la douane administrative, puis ensuite par la douane judiciaire. Et la douane judiciaire, au cours de son enquête, a découvert que le responsable venait de mettre en ligne un site de vente de médicaments contrefaits. Alors ça aussi, c'est quelque chose qu'on a pu constater. On a des personnes qui peuvent commencer petit en vendant des contrefaçons sur un site de e-commerce, alors pas Price Minister. Puis en fait ces gens peuvent être gênés aussi, c'est le cas par exemple de Price Minister, par une politique qui va un peu les gêner. Donc soit ces gens-là sont vraiment des petits, ils vont se déverser plutôt sur les sites de petites annonces, c'est le cas français, ou alors s'ils sont ambitieux, ils vont partir sur ce type d'organisation de fraude à l'international. Donc ils vont vendre des contrefaçons, mais on va voir aussi, j'ai des cas précis, ils vont vendre aussi des cigarettes, voire des médicaments. Puisqu'à chaque fois, il s'agit d'un accroissement mécanique de leur chiffre d'affaires. Intéressant aussi dans ce cas-là, c'est que l'argent qui était collecté en France repartit à l'étranger pour être blanchi. Donc 4 millions d'euros ont été notifiés pour délit de blanchiment. C'est un délit douanier. Voilà, donc c'était un cas concret de travail de lutte contre la fraude sur Internet. Internet n'est pas une malédiction, la diffusion de contrefaçon n'est pas une malédiction. Alors pour finir, je voudrais simplement insister sur un fait qui est très important dans le cadre de nos enquêtes, c'est la notion de collaboration. coopération. On collabore avec nos collègues douaniers, répressifs ou en matière de renseignement. On essaie de travailler main dans la main avec le monde de l'Internet, c'est-à-dire autant les prestataires techniques, les fournisseurs d'accès, les hébergeurs, les registrars, ceux qui permettent de vendre des noms de domaines, travailler avec le secteur bancaire et travailler bien sûr avec les sites de e-commerce. Voilà, et donc vraiment pour terminer, je pense qu'il serait peut-être souhaitable que dans chaque pays de l'Union européenne, qu'une cellule en douane équivalente à cyberdouane existe pour aussi améliorer le transfert de l'information. La vitesse d'identification sur Internet est vraiment très très importante, d'où l'intérêt de signer des conventions comme avec Piracy Minister, où dans le cadre de ce protocole existe un cas d'identification quasiment dans la journée d'une information. On peut aussi, nous, douaniers, heureusement, s'appuyer sur un réseau d'attachés douaniers à l'étranger, voilà, parce qu'évidemment Internet est un média transfrontières, mais existe des principes de coopération entre les États, donc on peut faire revenir de l'information en France, par exemple, dans le cas de noms de domaines déclarés aux États-Unis. C'est un cas qui nous arrive assez souvent. Voilà.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Barnett. I'm with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I am very appreciative of all the people that have stayed, especially at 5 o'clock, especially in a city so beautiful as Paris. I think it maybe speaks not to my ability as a public speaker, but also really your interest in this subject matter. And let me tell you just a little bit about U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement so you understand our role in fighting counterfeiting and online digital theft on the Internet. You heard from my boss, the Director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, earlier today, and he gave you a few statistics. But let me just tell you, we are the second largest federal law enforcement agency in the United States. We have 7,200 agents, customs agents, that have arrest authority. We are a law enforcement agency. We also have another roughly 13,000 employees who specialize either in the administrative side or because we have responsibility for the immigration side, they work that. We have a budget of approximately $5.8 billion U.S., which they told me there wouldn't be any math in this job, but my conversion is approximately 4.2 billion euros on a good day. And we have, of course, responsibility for the criminal investigation of customs violations, and customs violations historically for us have been trademark counterfeiting. But that was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, cargo containers at the ports that had fake purses or maybe VHS videos, maybe even Betamax videos for those of us who are old enough. And so, of course, like many of our criminal activities that we are responsible for investigating, which includes child pornography and fraud, as Luke said, customs fraud, as well as counterfeiting and online digital theft, it has moved to the Internet. And so we've had to retool. And I think the reason that I was asked to be part of the panel is because we did retool in something called Operation in Our Sights, which I'd like to spend just a few minutes telling you about. But just before I do, I think Luke made a good point, is that customs agents had to adapt. And it wasn't easy. We had to develop, just as French customs did, specialization in online investigations, computer forensic agents who spend hundreds of hours training to investigate computer forensics and the Internet. We were told by many that we wouldn't be successful, that investigations on the Internet were proverbial sort of spitting in the ocean, that you can't really fight it. It's just so large. We were discouraged to some extent, but we were mostly because Director Morton had a real mission that he wanted to take on, we moved forward. We also realized, though, that we didn't know it all, and we weren't going to. So part of this panel is talking about working with private sector. And we immediately decided that we needed to work with groups like MPAA, Ted's group, with RIAA, with the IACC, which is our domestic trade association for rights holders, and others, and also our partners in the federal government, such as the Department of Justice, which had obviously spent many, many years working on this, and I was formerly with the Department of Justice, so I certainly have a great back the next day and seize the sites under a slightly different domain name. What we found also was a little surprising. Of the 9 sites, only 2 came back. 7 again decided they weren't going to engage in this type of conduct anymore. We re-seized one of them. He thought the Coco Channels domain name was not registered in the United States. It is. And so ultimately, we didn't have to go back as much as we thought we would. Our second round of operation on our sites was timed around Cyber Monday. And Cyber Monday, you may know, is billed as the largest online retail shopping day of the year. It's the day after, Monday after Thanksgiving in the United States. And ultimately, that was a consumer protection mission. We wanted to take out a number of these domain names that were offering counterfeit goods that people would buy for the holiday shopping season. We took out 82 domain names on that day. 77 of them were operated in China, but they are all registered in the United States. And 5 of them offered movies, music, and software. And we're announcing today, actually, and I wish I could say it was timed for this conference, but we're announcing our 3rd round of seizures. We've just recently seized about 10 domain names, as Director Morton noted. These were offering streamed sporting events. We timed it, as I say, not around the conference, but around the Super Bowl, which is the largest watched sporting event in the United States. And we wanted to try to get as much attention to it as we could. Extra effect. There's one last thing I would say, and this is more maybe for dialogue, but I just offer it now, is ultimately, Operation Our Sites has been successful from an operational standpoint. ICE has taken a lot of criticism for it. There is criticism from individuals, as has been talked about, that are wanting to promote criminal activity even as First Amendment protected, which is, of course, a constitutional right in the United States, or accusing us of censorship. I've said this many times. We're a law enforcement agency. We don't have feelings. We don't think that way. It's a crime. We will enforce the law. But I think the dialogue needs to be a little bit more from, frankly, you as the private industry, of when that criticism comes up, we have a hard time fighting back because these are ongoing criminal investigations, and we won't engage in blogging on these things. But I think it's important, and maybe we will have a chance to talk about it, I think it's important for the rights holder community, and we don't call you rights holder community, frankly, we call you victims, because that's what it is victims of criminal activity. And it's important for the victims, candidly, to stand up and say, this is not protected speech. This is something that is criminal activity, again, in the United States, that should be enforced. And so maybe that's an area we can touch on for dialogue. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've had a dialogue now, and I have a few questions for the panel. I'm going to cross off the question to Eric about how ICE feels about what it's doing. We're not going to go there. They don't have feelings. But a question for the panel would be, what type of new trends have you seen in selling, marketing, advertising counterfeit goods or pirated content online? You know, what is counterfeiting like today that maybe it wasn't like a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? What's the modus operandi? And I think, let's see, who had the first dibs on this one? Ted, did you have some thoughts about how things have gone from maybe 5 years ago to how they are today? You mentioned, I think, cyber lockers is one thing that I think is relatively new.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the beginning of my introduction, one of the big changes we've seen is the shift, as evidenced in part by the Envisional report, but even previous reports, from peer-to-peer to direct download sites, cyber stashes or cyber lockers, streaming, leeching sites, some of which were included in the presentation that we just heard. What we're also seeing is the quality of what can be downloaded is increasing incredibly. I mean, you get Blu-ray off of Usenet relatively quickly. We're also seeing, of course, that these sites whose freedom of speech we're infringing are becoming increasingly nimble. They understand the shortcomings of civil litigation. They understand the law very well. They know which countries will do more enforcement than others. They divide and conquer. They set themselves up to be hosted in one place. They register the domain name in another. They have a bank account somewhere else. And so they've gotten very adept at bouncing around. And this is why we're looking at more things like site blocking. And of course, there, in response to arguments that this is some form of censorship, we say, take a look at this site. It's over 90% infringing content, and the little non-infringing content that may have been put up there was put there on purpose in order to run this argument, and that there is no freedom to receive. Freedom of speech doesn't extend to receiving or giving pirated illegal content. And so we do our best, because that's a very good point, that we have to recognize that there's a lot of issues out there on the internet. We have to be careful and respect privacy. We have to be attuned to the concerns that people have about other fundamental freedoms that can be impinged on the internet, and these things have to be balanced. But when we're talking about a site that is overwhelmingly infringing, we don't believe that those things come into play.
Okay, any other panelists have thoughts on new trends or things you've seen? And I'm just guessing, given what ICE is doing, perhaps finding domain name registrars and registries outside the U.S. may be an upcoming trend once they figure out where those sites, the domain names, are actually registered. Just a guess. But any other thoughts from panelists? Yeah, Luc?
Oui, historiquement, on a toujours constaté que dès que de nouveaux moyens de communication apparaissaient sur Internet, ils étaient immédiatement détournés de leur fonction première. C'était le cas, par exemple, il y a quelques années des blogs. On avait vu, nous, immédiatement l'apparition de blogs proposant des contrefaçons de médicaments ou de chaussures. Et c'est le cas aujourd'hui des réseaux sociaux. Voilà, 500 millions de comptes Facebook et pas mal de comptes qui proposent aussi de la marchandise contrefaite aujourd'hui.
Okay, so good comments. Let's go ahead and move on to our next question. What are some examples of successful partnerships that have existed between law enforcement and rights owners? What does a successful criminal case look like? And so maybe we'll look to Luc and Eric on the end there, as far as good cases you've had of cooperation with rights owners, and again, what can rights owners do to help work with you better to continue the success you've had?
Thank you. The Operation Our Sites was a very successful partnership between industry and the government, and it still continues to be so. We get in a number of referrals of websites, and in terms of what the private sector can do is candidly a little bit of research. We need something more than the domain name. We need something less than a really thick file. Somewhere in there is maybe an understanding of how this is impacting your particular business, how popular this site is, either through Alexa ranking or some other analytics, although we candidly can do that ourselves as well. But also some sense of, If you've tried to do anything about it civilly, if, at least in the United States, if you have not tried to do something about it civilly, the Department of Justice would tend to prefer that you not do that if you're going to refer it to us criminally. And ultimately, also, if you have sent any cease and desist letters or takedown notices, that's something that I think would be helpful to obviously know about. In terms of what a successful criminal case looks like, it's helpful, obviously, for us to have a body in the United States, not absolutely necessary. Working with the Department of Justice, which has just a tremendous Office of International Affairs, and working with our own Office of International Affairs, which is quite large, we are able to track down individuals in other countries. Of course, it's helpful, it's essential that those other countries have extradition treaties with us. So those are the types of things that would help make a very successful criminal prosecution.
Oui, pour nous, la collaboration avec les titulaires de marques, les ayants droit, est vraiment très importante. Cyberdouane est un service de renseignement, donc notre mission est de collecter l'information, la traiter et la restituer à des services opérationnels. Donc il est important pour nous de savoir que si le dossier est transmis à un service opérationnel, la marque sera présente et assistera le service lors de la saisie opérationnelle.
All right, let's go next to voluntary efforts that are being taken by rights owners and online intermediaries to help fight the problem. So we've got a couple of intermediaries here, and we've heard from the presentations already what programs they have in place and different policies. So maybe just looking to our two intermediaries here. What types of voluntary efforts do you have in place, maybe expanding upon the comments you've already made?
The main one is our AdWords counterfeit policy, but there's other policies in connection with other platforms, Blogger, YouTube, but AdWords is obviously the principal advertising platform. The things that we've done is, there's a dedicated team who is devoted to reviewing these complaints, and so there's that more manual element, and we're also looking to develop a lot more tools to help us more proactively detect counterfeiters. So it's a combination of both reactive and then proactive. The more data we have when these complaints are submitted, so are we seeing common URLs, common credit card numbers, common other personal data, that really helps us then take more proactive measures, and that's something that we're really trying to implement more, because obviously that would help to call them out so we get to the point where they're not even getting into the system.
And your counterfeit goods notification policy is worldwide, correct? And it doesn't vary from country to country, unlike the trademark policy, correct?
It is worldwide. So that's something that we need to work on, but it is worldwide and it is uniformly applied.
Regarding the Press Minister policy, it's clear that the partnership and the development of partnerships with the right owners is not usual, because you could imagine when someone, me for an example, could call a right owner to explain that we want to have a sort of knowledge sharing between right owners and internet marketplace. Why is it a surprise for the right owners? Because the right owners need to share to an internet company some very confidential information about their products, about how they could detect counterfeit products. That is to say that they have created a sort of the best counterfeiters in the world, because we have many information to detect counterfeit products based on pictures, for example. So the first step for us was to create a sort of confidence link between right owners and internet company to explain that we want to have these proactive and preventive measures, and we want to receive information from you to feed our system, our tools, to detect proactively and preventively the counterfeit goods. Also, we could mention one point. It's clear that in internet company and an internet platform has more information than the right owners about contents, about the seller. For example, I could see about a seller his IP address, his bank number, his email address, how many accounts he could have, etc. All this information are hidden for right owners and are hidden for any users. So it's clear that we have more information and we could use this more information to help the right owners in the detection and to create these preventive and proactive measures. That's why we have decided to have this sort of partnership, and each week, each month, we could have some phone calls, some discussion, meetings with right owners to have more information or to explain that we want to share information with them. But it's clear that all right owners has not yet accepted to have this partnership with us. Each year we published a sort of charts about the biggest brands victims of counterfeiting on Price Minister, and the first one, I will not mention it, it's a name of a fruit, and the first one had never decided, had not yet decided to have this kind of partnership with Price Minister, but we have decided to have this proactive measure also with this kind of brands, with our tools, with our system. But I think is not perfect, but it works.
Okay, great. And Natalie, I know in France there have been a lot of voluntary measures as well, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about, I think it's called the French Charter, I believe it's called, and maybe the other Internet Stakeholders Dialogue that has had the Memorandum of Understanding coming out of that.
Yes, and actually not only in France, because we started with a cooperation agreement with Yahoo Japan on December 4th of 2009, when I was with Louis Vuitton. Then we signed the French Charter, which was between internet platforms and right owners. Which is about, on the one hand, notice and takedown procedures, and on the other hand, proactive and preventive measures. Lacoste also signed this charter, and I'm very pleased to see that that's the biggest change, I think, over the past years. We have more and more cooperation agreements like this one. We had two other ones for Louis Vuitton in 2010 before I left. Benoit mentioned the agreement we signed with Rakuten and Price Minister. What has been a challenge was not the contents of the agreement, but to have CEO Mikitani in Paris, because his agenda is more complicated than President Sarkozy's agenda, probably. So that was it. We also signed a cooperation agreement with All-In Market, a Korean auction platform, with Louis Vuitton, and now we are very pleased about the progress made within the Internet Stakeholder Dialogue, because as Benoit mentioned, on text, and we, Lacoste, are willing to sign it because we are actively supporting it. We think it's extremely important to develop this type of cooperation. As it has been said, there are two worlds, the legitimate economy and the underground economy. And all actors from the legitimate economy should cooperate all together, and that's only through cooperation that we will be able to make a little difference. Indeed, this morning we heard about this market that is booming, but we also heard about the fact that there is more and more cooperation, more and more organization, more and more IP policies, like the one that were described on Google and Price Minister, and that's the biggest change.
All right, thank you. We do have some time for questions, and I've been informed that the next discussion, which is on your agenda, has actually been canceled. So we have some bonus time for questions. So I don't want to keep you here too long, but we do have time for questions. So maybe answers as well, but we'll at least start with questions. So hopefully we can get microphones to people with questions on this topic.
Yes, I am Mr. Berbino, and I am one of the members of the authority in France have to enforce the graduated response. Je vais continuer en français parce que nous sommes quand même à Paris. On voit, il paraît des études universitaires, il y en a eu plusieurs en 2010, sur l'observation en particulier du réseau BitTorrent. Il y a eu une étude américaine, il y a eu une étude de l'INRIA en France, il vient de paraître une étude conduite par l'université de Madrid, et toutes ces études convergent sur deux éléments. Le premier qui aboutit au même constat que celui qu'a donné Ted Shapiro en citant l'étude InVision, qui est le pourcentage très élevé de contenus illégaux ou piratés, au-delà de 90%. Et puis, si on n'accepte pas la pornographie. Et puis, le deuxième point est que le nombre de sites qui mettent à disposition ces contenus est relativement limité. Ils en identifient quelques dizaines sur l'ensemble de l'Internet pour rendre compte d'environ 2/3 des contenus piratés. Si, par exemple, ICI s'appuie également sur ces recherches universitaires qui sont publiées et qui publient même l'intégralité des adresses IP qu'ils ont collectées.
I wouldn't say necessarily the academic studies themselves. I think what we really do rely on, though, is a lot of industry. Industry does understand where its products are being offered as counterfeits or as stolen digital material. It's something we've talked about too. You know, just candidly, studies are very difficult because you don't always know the motivation of the study one way or the other, and so I think for us, we will talk to industry. We did, in the second round of operation on our sites, we did seize 2 BitTorrent sites. We understand about cyber lockers, obviously. Cyber lockers are very challenging for a number of reasons, but it doesn't mean that they should not be a part of ongoing criminal investigations. So I think those materials have a good place in the discussion and debate, but I think we have to judge our determination of our targets based on a number of factors, including obviously the popularity and as well as the amount of infringing material on the sites.
No, doesn't. Yeah, now it works. Sorry. My name is Tim Kuik. I work for Brain. We do enforcement also against all kinds of websites and services that are overwhelmingly dealing in infringing material, often by, of course, linking to it. Now, one thing we see when we want to hold them responsible is that the websites are operating anonymously and they obviously are hosted by hosting providers. We turn to the hosting providers who are reluctant to part with the identity information they have about the website operators, but then when they eventually do, mostly on court order, it turns out that in 99% of those cases, more than 99% of those cases, these identifying details are false. Now, what we are asking the Dutch government to do, we're operating in Holland, is to establish that hosting providers need to at least have a duty to perform best efforts to have their customers, whose websites they host, identify themselves. That's one part of it. Of course, that can be faked, and those who engage in illegal activities will do so. But as a second part to it, we are pleading that there will be an obligation for hosting providers that when they know or ought to know that they have incorrect identity details, to suspend services to such a website, suspend website operators, properly identifies himself. Now obviously we're in Holland, we have a big airport, we have a big seaport, and we like to have also a big internet port. It's one of the main internet ports in the world. So government doesn't really want to hassle hosting providers much. Such an obligation could take place, but would have to take place in an international way. I heard that Cyber Duan, a gentleman also mentioned that the identification of the real culprits is the biggest problem. It makes the sites also very nimble, as Tetchapur said. So I plead that this is taken on internationally as a result, or as a cause rather, to give us this result. That we can hold the true culprit responsible. Perhaps the Cyber Duan and ICE could comment on that.
And if I could jump in there, actually, I think ICANN might have a role in that as well. I believe that there are ICANN requirements for registrars. If it's a registrar that is not, that is allowing its registrant to not have correct registrant details, having false information there, they're in breach of the ICANN rules for registrars. And I would point that ICANN is based in California, which I think is U.S. jurisdiction, so ICE might have something to say about that as well. But I think that would be one avenue to pursue, is complain to ICANN and say, hey, this registrar is not complying with your rules. Ultimately, they could suspend their ability to register domain names if it comes to that. And we know about ICANN's enforcement is not so hot sometimes, but that would be one avenue to pursue at least. Yep.
You can quickly affect the business that is being done by that website.
Yeah, it's almost a burden of proof question you're saying. Yeah, if they're false, suspend immediately, let them fix later, as opposed to give them time to fix it and all the time they're doing the online business. Yeah, that's a good point. Any panelists have comments? Okay, all right. Let's maybe have, say, one more question. Okay.
Hi, good evening. A lot of the BitTorrent websites have all been closed down, but the next wave of piracy seems to be done with the cyber lockers that you mentioned, and information that is stored and encrypted, downloaded in bits and pieces, which is the latest trend that seems to be happening, which is not easily identifiable in terms of the files that are being downloaded because they're encrypted in some kind of a tunnel. So how are you going to be detecting this and stopping this kind of piracy, because this seems to be on an increase at the moment and very difficult to detect what is being downloaded? Because the software, what it does is, I'm sure you're aware, it downloads it in different streams and different pieces of data, and then it stitches it all up into one file.
Still on. the challenges that you have hit on, and frankly have been hit on by a number of other questions, are exactly why we set up Operation Our Sites as a permanent operation at the IPR Center, because it is going to be an extended law enforcement action working not only with our agents but with the Justice Department, which has a computer crimes and intellectual property section which is really first rate in terms of its capabilities, has actually its own cyber lab in the District of Columbia. We have U.S. attorneys around the country who have been trained in computer hacking and intellectual property attorneys that they're called. But that's not to say that, and it's, you know, I've been in law enforcement 15 years. It used to be we would go after somebody for a mobile phone that was as big as this microphone. And now I have to deal with mobile phones that can contain money in them and cash that's secreted across the border. So the general problem is that technology is always a challenge for law enforcement. My biggest fear, quite frankly, is that law enforcement, through its own limitations, has a hard time keeping up. I was sent a digital file yesterday that my Department of Homeland Security server will not let me open because obviously they fear various other issues. So the point being that you've identified challenges. What we have to do is work very hard to find solutions, but nobody, frankly, is saying it's easy. And it's also not, if I could just say, a one-prong approach. We don't claim to be a magic bullet. We don't claim to be the sole solution. It is with civil actions. It is with voluntary cooperation from good corporate citizens that want to do the right thing. And it is from, frankly, meetings like this where everyone has said it, I think. We have come tremendously far since the first Global Congress. So I think the best I can tell you is we're going to keep at it and keep going all the time.
And I think that's an excellent note to end on, just how far we have come. And as mentioned before, I was on the panel with Natalie back in Dubai 3 years ago. So think back to February 2008. And I think a lot of the things mentioned by each of these panelists was not in existence back in February 2008. Was there a French cyber customs in February 2008? I doubt that. There sure wasn't Operation in Our Sites back then. So we've come very far. Two other developments in the U.S. in our industry, the Eli Lilly pharmaceutical company industry. At the urging of the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator, a coalition has been formed that includes search engines, Google being one of those, domain name registrars, payment processors, also known as credit card companies, and shippers to address the problem of counterfeit and illegal drugs being sold online. They had their first meeting about 3 weeks ago. They're calling themselves the Center for Safe Internet Pharmacies, or CSIP. So just excellent progress in the U.S., and that's about 2 weeks old, so very recent. Also something I read, which is the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, IACC. They've announced that MasterCard and Visa are willing to work with them to set up a central clearinghouse or reporting site where anyone, I believe, rights owner, maybe even consumers, can report a website selling counterfeits or pirated content and accepting Visa or MasterCard. With no fees to be paid, no indemnification required from the credit card company, so streamlining that whole process. It is just incredible. When we first sat down, the INTA also has a best practices for addressing counterfeits online that came out in December of 2009. I remember being in the conference room at the INTA offices in New York City with the credit card companies, explaining to them the problem. And that was maybe 3-4 years ago, how far they have come to be willing to reach out to the IACC to say, hey, let's make it easier for people to report websites selling this type of content. So we haven't solved it yet, but just great progress being made. I think the Global Congress, we can give partial credit to Global Congress. So again, thanks to the organizers, and thank you for all the panelists as well. Enjoy the reception.
Just an announcement. Okay. Yeah. Just an announcement about the reception. It will be held outside of the main plenary room, in the exhibition hall, and for the VIP red badge holder.